You hate government, one of them libertarian types, or maybe you just can't stand the president, gun grabbers, or warmongers. Me too. That's why I invented LibertyStickers.com. Well, Rick owns it now, and I didn't make up all of them, but still, if you're driving around and want to tell everyone else how wrong their politics are, there's only one place to go. LibertyStickers.com has got your bumper covered. Left, right, libertarian, empire, police, state, founders quotes, central banking. Yes, bumper stickers about central banking. Lots of them. And, well, everything that matters. LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. Hey, y'all, Scott here. On average, how much do you think these interviews are worth to you? Of course, I've never charged for my archives in a dozen years of doing this, and I'm not about to start. But at patreon.com/Scott Horton Show, you can name your own price to help support and make sure there's still new interviews to give away. So what do you think? 2 bits? $1.50? There are usually about 80 interviews per month, I guess, so take that into account. You can also cap the amount you'd be willing to spend in case things get out of hand around here. That's patreon.com/Scott Horton Show. And thanks, y'all. All right, y'all, Scott Horton Show. Check out the archives at scotthorton.org. That's my website. Sign up for the podcast feed there as well. And follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. All right, introducing the great Kelley Vlahos, regular writer for the American Conservative magazine, and notably historically right about everything she ever wrote about Afghanistan, that's for sure, and a lot of other things too, former writer for antiwar.com. And this one is in the American Conservative. It's called The Return of Torture. CIA and Congress oppose Trump's push, but the public may not. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, Kelley?
Great, Scott. Thanks for having me again.
Very happy to have you here. And, well, happy to see you writing about this subject and in the American Conservative magazine, where conservatives can see it, because as you show in the article, it's a documented fact, conservatives are worse on torture than liberals and other creatures, although not much worse because of how bad liberals are, too, not because of how good conservatives are in any way. But you've got, some kind of super-duper majority, I think, on the right. 85% say that they support torture right now. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's, this is all, it all comes down to the politicization of national security issues. So when you're polling people and they identify as Republican or conservative, they're not identifying as American conservatives or libertarian conservatives. They're identifying with the sort of Rush Limbaugh, Republican establishment, George Bush, Dick Cheney Republicanism that defined, our war era of the last decade. And so when put to the question, they say, sure, we need to torture people and drop bombs and do everything we have to do to, defend America. So I'm not really surprised at that response, because I don't see those people as the kind of conservatives that maybe you and I might identify with or recognize.
Yeah. Well, and, conservatism in the 1990s was no wonderful thing as far as I could tell, but certainly the Karl Rove, George W. Bush legacy is one of, it's basically the Roger Ailes model, which is, I think Bush even said, you can fool some of the people all the time, and those are the ones you want to concentrate on. And then what he was misunderestimating was that all the rest of the right would race to be just as foolish, rather than be left behind. I guess.
And it's almost, and then you get, and everyone seems to get, and not you and I, of course, and the conservatives, American conservative, but they find themselves having to check a box like the litmus test. So if you identify with this, right of center republicanism, conservative republicanism, then therefore you have to be this, you have to feel this way or take this position on interrogation and war. And using harsh interrogation tactics against terrorists, So
these are the first principles of conservatism now,
right? And this happens, and particularly at election time, where and this is why in many cases, in addition to so many other reasons that the party candidates don't do well, because Americans feel like that they have to check boxes in terms of who they support. And when it comes to Republicans and conservatives, and you've seen this with Ron Paul, back in the day where there would be all these guffaws on the stage of the Republican primary debates because how dare he oppose the war policy, because that just isn't the box that
They even booed him when he quoted Jesus. He got up there and quoted from the Sermon on the Mount in South Carolina, and they booed him near off the stage.
Yeah, so...
Good times. Well, and so the Democrats here in the poll, 53% of them are for torture at this point. So break down all the reasons why you think that number is so high when they supposedly are the civil rightsy people,
Yeah, and I mean, I interviewed Catherine Hawkins from the Constitution Project in the piece, and, she made a good point. A lot of it depends on how the questions are asked. And a lot of these questions relating to interrogation and torture over the years have been something like this. Would you support using harsh interrogation techniques or torture if you felt like it was going to save the lives of Americans? Almost like this sort of 24 scenario. Like, would you torture this terrorist if you knew that a bomb would be going off in Manhattan and within hours? Maybe not that extreme, but a lot of times when these questions are posed, it's either right after an event like San Bernardino, or where there was this suggestion that maybe the killer's wife might have known something, and just the hint of that, like maybe we could have stopped this from happening if we had these particular tools, then maybe so many people wouldn't have died. And I think when you poll people right after events like that, tend to elicit, responses like, sure, let's just do it.
Right. And meanwhile, they never do the poll they never do the poll in the middle of the week to just see how it is at a regular time. You're right. It's always in reaction to an event, right in the middle of everybody being busy reacting. And then, of course, as you say, too, the way and you quote the expert in here saying, Hawkins, talking about how it's all in the question. And, it's surprising really sometimes, isn't it, just how loaded the questions can be. When you would think that the pollsters would be trying, I mean, they're just people, but you would think that they would be trying to form these poll questions in a way that don't push so hard. At least, when we're talking about Gallup and this kind of thing, not political pollsters doing a push poll, but one that's supposed to be just a real gauge of opinion. They really do say, but what if it was to save everyone in your city and you only had to torture the one guy one time, or what,
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, I came across a few polls, because I had tried to go over as many as possible. There were a couple outliers where the pollsters would ask specifically about, like, particular techniques, like hitting and slapping and waterboarding and slamming people and sleep deprivation. I think when you get down to that level, people get a little squeamish, and they say, no, of course I don't support that. So I think, I'll be honest with you, I think my story, that is one angle, like where the people stand on torture at any given time might support a president who wants to return to torture policies because the American public tends to be kind of fickle on this issue. And right now, when I wrote this story, I think it was after one of the myriad mass shootings that, occurred over the summer. And so that you were getting a sense that the public would support Donald Trump, who was actually calling for torture at the time when I wrote the story. But I think the more important angle of the story is, what would these two presidential candidates do if elected to office? And is there a climate in Washington to actually support, a return to torture? And what I found that there really isn't the stomach for it anymore. I mean, we can talk about the reasons why, but I think the last 10 years and the fight over the treatment of detainees and Gitmo and, Dick Cheney and his secret policies, I think people, there's some fatigue there on the policy side, and I don't think that there's any rush to get harsher right now, at least right now.
Although, yeah, I mean, then again, if we're talking about President Trump and he insists, and there is another attack here or in Europe, whatever, one with a double-digit body count or worse, then it was interesting to read the quotes that you have there of especially Michael Hayden, who everyone remembers 9/11 happened on his watch when he was the director of the National Security Agency. CIA and FBI always get blamed for not doing their jobs that day, but where was the NSA? Nobody ever even criticizes them at all except for James Bamford. But you could just as well blame 9/11 on him as any other person in government, as long as we're at it. But his quote here is, "Oh, well, boo-hoo, when people are creating these star chamber persecutions of us CIA heroes," because he was later head of CIA, then, that makes us not want to do it. And that was the way he framed it, was that, to have the Senate investigate him as a star chamber, lawless trial, and the poor persecuted CIA officers are now terrified to do the right thing and torture people, was basically the way he was, framing it. But I wonder really how true that is when, after all, everybody at the CIA did get away with it. Nobody got in any trouble whatsoever. I mean, the latest is that Jose Rodriguez is going to have to give a deposition in a civil suit. But, I mean, come on. I think they only did that just to show how cleanly everybody got away with this, from the torturers to the lawyers to the principals in the Bush administration who knew they were breaking the law when they ordered this in the first place. So
I mean, as always, the truth is somewhere between the lines, somewhere deep inside, and any explanation or declaration like that, and that's why I said there doesn't seem to be the stomach for it, but the reasons why are somewhat elusive, because I would imagine that there's some fatigue with the investigations. There's the ongoing Senate committee investigation into torture. We're still getting revelations about...
Wait, it's ongoing? The Feinstein committee?
I mean, technically, I think it's still open, because open in the sense where they had sent the report, the final report was sent to all the agencies, and now they're trying to make sure that the agencies are actually reading them, and there's been a flurry of letters from the Senate committee, Intelligence Committee, to these various agencies saying, have you read the report? Is there a response? We want to make sure. The CIA actually mistakenly destroyed their copy of the report. Mm-hmm. So I say it's open in a sense that there really hasn't been any closure.
Well, and that's such an important point, right? I can't remember, maybe it was Gelman in the Post reported that there is a copy of this almost 7,000-page Senate torture report that's sitting in a safe at Department of Justice headquarters where no one will read it because they know if they do, they have to start arresting people for committing felonies.
Right,
and
they might have
they're
to start
afraid to look at it.
At a FOIA request as well.
Yeah.
So it's almost like deniability, this plausible deniability. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen it. I don't have it. And the other point is that there's still a big struggle to get the complete report even published or in the hands of journalists at all. So all we have is 600 or 800 page summary, which is damning enough. But the 7,000 words, 7,000 pages rather, are still out there that God knows what's in it. So, I mean, I'm not one to give props to congressional committees for their work. I mean, very rarely do you see a committee that actually produces something, but they produced something here, and I think that they were, the senators were taken aback by what they found, because what they found was a lot of egregious torture happening that they were told wasn't happening during the war, and then they find out like a lot worse that was happening than they had believed, and that not only that, but that they were lied to, because all along the CIA was saying that that the torture, or the techniques rather, were eliciting information like actionable intelligence, and what the report was telling them that it didn't. And so they were steamed on a couple different levels. And so I think they did good work. It's just will anything come of it other than, scared bureaucrats afraid to torture again? I don't know. I don't know if the lessons have been learned, and I don't know if we can trust that torture or, whatever you want to call it, isn't happening right now in places like Afghanistan, or even Iraq and Syria and Somalia and all these other hot spots we are in North Africa. I'm working on a story now about private contractors, working on the U.S. behalf in Iraq and in Syria and Afghanistan. We've almost sort of gotten inured to the fact that there's this, like in Afghanistan, there's a 3-to-1 ratio of private contractors there, and they're also operating in places where politicians want to keep the whole boots on the ground level down, and so when they do that, they continue to put U.S. contractors in there because they don't count, quote unquote, as our boots on the ground. And I'm doing a story on whether that'll just keep increasing because putting U.S. forces in places like Syria is such a hot potato right now that we'll just keep putting contractors out there. We don't know how many contractors in Syria, but the Daily Beast had reported over the summer that there was a Pentagon contract bid a no-bid contract had gone out for $10 million to a subsidiary intelligence company, for intelligence work overseas, including Syria. So, my sources say that could mean interrogations. It could mean just plain intelligence, human intelligence. We don't know what it is, but let's just say that the mention of that bid has disappeared from the web since. So I don't know if we'll ever know, and calls to the Pentagon and CACI have gone unreturned on it for me. But yeah, so what if we are putting private military interrogators back into the war zone like we did in Iraq, and we know CACI was involved in the Abu Ghraib scandal. So this stuff could be going on under the radar while people like Hayden are telling reporters, we'll never go back to that again because we don't have the stomach for it. So,
Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at WallStreetWindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. WallStreetWindow.com. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here. It's always safe to say that one should keep at least some of your savings in precious metals as a hedge against inflation. And if this economy ever does heat back up and the banks start expanding credit, rising prices could make metals a very profitable bet. Since 1977, Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. has been helping people buy and sell gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and they do it well. They're fast, reliable, and trusted for more than 35 years. And they take Bitcoin. Call Robertson Roberts at 1-800-874-9760 or stop by rrbi.co.
Well, and we know from Jeremy Scahill's reporting, you mentioned Somalia there, that the CIA, quote-unquote, helps the, quote-unquote, Somali government run a torture prison, a dungeon, really, beneath Mogadishu there. And then, forgive me, because, really, to quote Eli Lake as a source for a thing, but damn it confirms my bias when Eli Lake says that, there's another secret CIA torture prison in Somalia, too, up there in Somaliland. Dear. As well. So make what you will of that it's a Eli Lake story, but it didn't seem to be tied to any anti-Iran agenda in the article or anything like that.
For one.
For the first time ever. Well, since he lied us into war with Iraq for Iran accidentally, but he didn't mean to do that. Now, so here's the thing, though. The Bagram prison... Well, let me ask you this, because we can go back to Bagram in Afghanistan. You mentioned Afghanistan. I want to go back to that, but what about actual CIA black sites? As far as we know now, is there any reporting that says that they really do still have these things? Would that thing in Somalia not count, because that supposedly is a Somali thing? Or that would be a strong indication that Obama really did continue the Bush policy of letting the CIA kidnap and detain and then treat people who knows what way, at least within the torture rules of the rewritten Army Field Manual. But I wonder whether, maybe we just all assumed too quickly that when Bush shut down all the black sites in '06, that they all were shut down and that they all stayed shut down, and that Obama, it's almost like a lore, right? That Obama decided, well, he's just going to kill all the al-Qaeda guys instead of capturing them. That way he doesn't have to deal with the torture question as much or that kind of thing. But I don't know if we really know that that's true.
We don't really know that it's true, and I think depending on who you talk to, some folks would say, there's no evidence that the CIA is still operating these black sites because of Obama's edict or executive order, which banned torture in black sites. Then there's others who say that it's still going on, but there's just no transparency, obviously. So it's really difficult for journalists to really get at this. I mean, there was a story that came out about a week ago about two ex-CIA prisoners. I don't know if you had seen this, and they were
about the electric chair. Uh-huh.
Yes. Now they were just released last year. So that's clearly right in the purview of the Obama administration. The CIA has denied that this ever even happened to these guys.
Although that thing, the part about the electric chair, at least, I think they were talking about the salt pit, which that would have been in the Bush years, earlier experience. Unless I'm wrong about that, I guess.
Right.
It could
be. I don't have the story in front of me. I'm not sure how long they're...
Well, I think we know that back in 2010 and 11, and later than that, maybe, into the surge, there was plenty of reporting about. There's the Bagram prison, but then there's also the wink nudge over the hill secret Bagram prison, where there's a whole other level of whether it was CIA or military. I guess I'm not certain exactly who was doing the torturing, but it was Appendix M tortures allowed. So not the old John Yoo rules, but still sleep deprivation and temperature manipulation and stress positions and some of these things that when they passed the law that said you have to stick to the Army Field Manual, they also said, but you got to rewrite the Army Field Manual so that you can still torture people to some degree.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but I guess we don't know. Do we know if the Bagram prison has been fully transferred over to the Afghans now or not?
I thought it was.
I guess, if there's only 10,000 American soldiers there now, then that's probably too many to be running, or not enough to be running that prison too.
Yeah.
Right.
But, you raise a good point that I noted in the story was, under the Obama administration, the transfer of detainees to countries with poor human rights records has continued.
Oh, the extraordinary rendition stuff, right?
Yeah, because his ban didn't address that practice of rendition. So I think that there are
because even the Bush administration said that, oh no, we would never export someone to a country where we knew that they would be tortured. So Obama didn't even really change that. If anything, he just said, we're sticking by that same standard.
Yeah. I just think that there is a real muddy gray area that things could be occurring, and I'm sure Jeremy Scahill is all over this himself. He's done, like you mentioned, some amazing reporting about what had been going on in Somalia. I don't know. And, that whole issue of the Pentagon putting out bids for intelligence services for Syria, that doesn't even address what, the CIA might be doing over there. And who they might be putting in there.
Well, if anything, they're renditioning al-Qaeda terrorists from around the world and bringing them to Syria where they can be heroes and moderate rebels and serve America's interests.
You just don't know. Yeah. And Donald Trump has sort of lowered the volume on talk about torture. I think it hit its peak over the summer, maybe June, after, I think there was the bombing in Turkey. Was the last time he was really, hot and talking about this publicly, where he talked about, we'll just have to change. Somebody asked him, are you gonna break the law because there's no torture allowed? Something very broad brush like that. And he said, I won't break the law, but I'll work to change it. meaning, institute new torture policy. He hasn't talked too much about that recently on the campaign trail at all. I don't know. I think you're right, Scott. I think if there is a major terrorist attack overseas, another one, that you would see some chest thumping again and probably have some support from the usual suspects in Congress. But I think I don't know, and to be honest, I don't think Hillary Clinton would be much different on this issue. She's a hawk.
Yeah, hey, you were just talking about her extraordinary rendition program, right?
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't shy away from this.
She was the Secretary of State in the first four Obama years, obviously involved in this very stuff.
Yeah. So, I guess, I think what this is all saying, since we have all these question marks flying around, particularly on where the country is going, a lot of it is we don't know because they're not addressing these issues at all in the debates, on the campaign trail, and their speeches. They don't talk about drones. They don't talk about Gitmo. They don't talk about the war, at any granular level at all. We hear about whether or not to have a no-fly zone. That's about it. And whether or not they're going to put more boots on the ground. But we don't know. We don't know how the next president, the next White House is going to address killer drones, for example.
Yeah.
Or, whether to close Gitmo and, how we treat detainees and how long we keep them without charge. It's just not been an issue that either candidate has wanted to address. But then again, they haven't addressed it in the previous 2 or 3 presidential elections either. That seems to just get dropped off the table, which is great for the Obama administration because it was able to carry on this sort of like manhunt policy, for all these years with no accountability to the press.
Yeah.
I guess Hillary would just do the same.
Yep. Well, I think the real problem with Trump, and Hillary has said before, she told the New York Daily News, oh, what, a ticking time bomb scenario? Yeah, sure, you got to torture people if you got to, kind of thing. So she's willing to flip-flop around on that. But with Trump, you can tell that he's just never considered, he doesn't even have it within him to be able to consider that, wait, what makes us, supposedly Enlightenment Western civilization here is that we're too good to torture even our very worst enemies. And that's part of what makes us so great, right? Not just that we live between Canada and Mexico, but that we're the kind of where torture is the kind of thing that barbarians do, and barbarians are what we're not, or at least we're striving to not be, or what. He doesn't even think this. He says literally, hey, if they can cut people's heads off, how come we can't?
It's all about the red meat for him. I don't think he's considered it the issue at all in any depth. I think what he says, what he thinks is the audience wants to hear, and the audience.
But that's what he wants to hear too. Yeah. That's why that's why it's his good guess as to what they want to hear is because that's what he would want to hear politicians say. Let's cut their heads off.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I am no fan of Senator John McCain, but on this one issue, he has been consistent. Mm-hmm. For all the obvious reasons, he was a POW. But he has always been consistent on the torture issue. And, thanks to him and others, across the aisle, that they pushed to have some of these changes made in the National Defense Authorization Act, and they pushed on the floor of the Senate and in the House. So, and he's a Republican of good standing. It doesn't have to be a Republican issue to torture. It's just that in the spirit of this political climate, it's all about the red meat. It's all about being tough. It's all about law and order, and there's no gray area. There's no saying, wait, we're better than this, or wait, we didn't get any actionable intelligence by waterboarding that guy 63 times or 80 times. That's just that there's no time for that sort of reason in this election. So I think that most of the time they just skip these issues because they are complicated. And I think I think that most Americans really in their heart know that we are better than that. It's just that we live in such a politicized environment that you have to take sides.
Right.
You're not
I mean, when
allowed.
Abu Ghraib broke, conservative talk radio in Texas, for example, I don't know what, Rush Limbaugh, I guess, played it down from the beginning, but a lot of conservative talk radio in Texas was, hey, man, whoa, we don't torture people. And a lot of these guys are veterans, and they swore oath to the Constitution and this and that. They actually know a little bit about this stuff. And that's one thing that we're not supposed to do. And then after a couple of weeks, it was like, okay, I guess, damn right, we're torturing people is the conservative line. And so everybody climb on board, and they all climbed on board. They started out shocked. They couldn't believe it, but.
Yeah, it was almost like when the evidence was irrefutable, then the spin became, well, what's the problem?
Right.
Like, oh, yeah, sure, that was just part of the interrogation process. What's the problem? These are terrorists. These are bad guys. They're the worst of the worst.
It's important, I think, in your article where you quote David Petraeus, of all people, being right about something only in a way. I mean, you can tell he doesn't really have wisdom, just knowledge, when he says that basically this is really bad public relations for us. And the pictures of the Abu Ghraib, tortures from then will never go away. They live on the internet forever.
Yeah.
And this kind of thing haunts us. And he's talked about this, in testimony, I think, before Congress a little bit before as well, about how torture undermines America's position in the Middle East. And, if you just extrapolate that out a little bit more, what he's really saying is, they hate us for our foreign policies, including when we torture them.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that they really hate, that motivates them to kill us. And all you have to do is realize that actually the 20th century existed before the 21st, and that America was involved in policies like, for one, extraordinary rendition to places like Syria and Egypt long before the 9/11 attacks. This is one of the reasons they hate us in the first place. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was a nobody two-bit rapist until America's sock puppet king of Jordan tortured him, and which turned him into a very serious man who went off to Afghanistan to become a warrior. And then this Ayman al-Zawahiri, who's the current leader of al-Qaeda and bin Laden's right-hand man. He was a surgeon until he was rounded up in the post-Sadat assassination roundup in Egypt and tortured, at which point he joined the Islamic Jihad and ended up joining with Osama to create al-Qaeda. This is where our enemies come from, is from torturing them. In fact, they say the same thing about Baghdadi, right? The current leader of the Islamic State, that he was tortured in America's prisons in the Iraq War occupation there. So, Petraeus, I guess, the way he says it is as close to them really catching on as we're going to get. But I think regular people who hear that could, if they stop and think about it for a minute, if torture is bad public relations, why? I mean, what are you saying? They hate us for something other than how good and pure and innocent and wealthy and whatever we are? But what a shame that that's actually as close as you're going to get to that kind of insight in D.C. is that, this is making my occupation a bit more difficult, right?
Yeah. Well, and David Petraeus is anything but he is a media, public relations maestro. And something tells me if he was able to keep all of this under a lid somewhere, it'd still be going on. It's just that once it came out, the lid was off, and the pictures had started hurt, public relations-wise, now it's a bad thing. But, I mean, the sad thing is that, he and all our other military leaders were fully on board with what was going on in places like Abu Ghraib until it got out, and it only got out because of journalists. And they fought it tooth and nail, as you can recall, during all those investigations.
Right. Well, and he wasn't, as you point out in the article, he wasn't directly in the chain of command of the Abu Ghraib prison, but he certainly was when he was the general of the entire Iraq War. There was still torture and abuse going on at the hands of the Joint Special Operations Command, including his sidekick, McChrystal.
Right, exactly. So it's the fact that it got out that became a problem, because he knows the value of these, information operations. And this was like the worst thing that could have happened. in terms of, the machinery, the propaganda machine that he had so carefully put into place, to further the agenda of the Iraq war policy, was to have these pictures come out, like you said. They don't go away. And all of the subsequent revelations about his support of the Shia death squads, for example, that doesn't go away either. And McChrystal and the joint, the special operations, black jails, or whatever you want to call them, torture cells that were operating in Iraq. I mean, we still fully don't know what happened there, but it doesn't go away. And so they lost control of the message. So, yeah, he's out there talking against torture, and that's great, but he has his own reasons. He has his own agenda.
Right. All right, well, listen, thank you very much for giving us your time again on the show today, Kelley. It's been great.
Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate it.
Always good to talk to you. That is the great Kelley Vlahos. Everybody, you can find her at the American Conservative magazine, theamericanconservative.com. This one is called The Return of Torture. CIA and Congress oppose Trump's push, but the public may not. And that's the Scott Horton Show. Check out the archives at scotthorton.org. Sign up for the podcast feed there as well. Help support at scotthorton.org/donate. And follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. Thanks.
I love Bitcoin, but there's just something incredibly satisfying about having real, fine silver in your pocket. That's why commodity discs are so neat. They're 1-ounce rounds of fine silver with a QR code on the back. Just grab your smartphone's QR reader, scan the coin, and you'll instantly get the silver spot price in Federal Reserve notes and Bitcoin. And if you donate $100 to the Scott Horton Show, he'll send you one. Learn more at facebook.com/commoditydiscs. commoditydiscs.com.
Hey, y'all, Scott here. The thing is, I need you guys to help me to get these download numbers up. So do me a favor and sign up for the podcast feeds of this show. You can choose the whole show or just the interviews at iTunes and Stitcher. All the buttons you need are at the top of the right margin at scotthorton.org. The more subscribers I have, the more iTunes and Stitcher will help promote the show to new listeners. If you're a hardcore fan, brand new or from way back, please leave them customer ratings and reviews, too. I'm trying to get these wars ended.